Welcome into the Big Little Podcast, everybody. I'm your host, Patrick Previty. That is Andrew Greig. The Miami Hurricanes are going to College Station to play Texas A&M in the first round of the college football playoff. We're going to preview that matchup, and we're going to start with the lean. Andrew, who are you thinking is going to win this game?
Yeah, I think this game is going to be a close one, especially at College Station, a game that there's going to be 110,000 people rooting against the Miami Hurricanes. But I think that is my lean here, right? If Carson Beck doesn't have an atrocious game, I think that the Miami Hurricanes, at the very least, keep it extremely close. And I think from top to bottom, this team is stacked. Whether it's on defense or offense, Carson Beck leading the way. Obviously, people know from the headlines that at some point he threw 4 interceptions versus Louisville. And just in certain games this season, he hasn't been SMU, namely, hasn't been the greatest quarterback in the world. But I think that he still is. He's been through the pressure environments in the SEC and won't be as affected as some other quarterbacks might be going into a stadium like we see in College Station. And also Malachi Toney has been a phenom for the Hurricanes as a freshman this season. They have a great offensive line. That defense is one of the top units in the country, especially that defensive line with Akeem Mesidor and Ruben Bain. So I think the lean here is Miami. They can do it in the trenches. They can do it at the skill positions, but obviously Texas A&M is going to put up as big of a fight as any other team in the college football playoff.
Yeah, I think Texas A&M deserves respect here. We're going to get into exactly their resume and why we both are leaning towards Miami here, but I think we just got to give credit to this Miami team. And you ask yourself when you evaluate them one specific question to start every single game, and is Carson Beck going to be the guy that we, have come to potentially expect to creep up out of nowhere and throw 4 picks in a game? Or is he going to be the guy who is, probably a step above a game manager, but really good? We saw him against Notre Dame, Florida State, somebody who can make plays, get the ball into Malachi Toney's hands. We're on script during the game. We're not playing from behind. And if you can answer that question and it's the latter, well, then that means that Miami probably is going to win the game. And I think we're both on the side that this isn't going to be the Carson Beck disaster class. But if it is, then all bets are off. But I don't think that either of us are obviously leaning that way because we're picking Miami. And then when you take a look at the rest of Miami, the line of scrimmage probably favors them, although Texas A&M certainly has their guys on the line of scrimmage, but you're probably opting for the O-line there to protect Beck. They've shown that this entire year, as well as the dominant defensive line with Akeem Mesidor and Ruben Bain to be able to get after Marcel Reed. And once you kind of get to that point, them going on the road doesn't really have as much weight. It's during the day. That's something else I think that is kind of a bit of a break for Miami. And I don't think that this is going to be a blowout by any means. I still probably wouldn't bet any more than 10 to 14 points for Miami. I mean, it could easily be 10 to 14 points, but I'm not going anywhere above that. So I think this would be a close game, but I think you got to lean Miami here, especially if Carson Beck can keep the turnovers to less than or equal to 1.
Yeah, I think Miami really starts to struggle in this game if they start losing the turnover margin by more than 1, like you just said. I think that 10 to 14 is probably the reason why I reacted like that. Is it's probably even a stretch above where I'd put them over Texas A&M at this point, especially going on the road. I think that the reasoning behind it makes sense because they are very dominant in the trenches. If you haven't watched Miami football this season, they can really lean on you in the run game. They have a running back by committee situation going on there. And then also like in the skill positions, they also have some great players there. But I think that just at home with that crowd behind them, it just won't get that out of hand, at least in my opinion. I think that it'll be anywhere from 1 to 2 scores, which isn't that bold of a prediction. Miami is underdogs right now. So, but I also just think that Marcel Reed, if we're going to talk about interceptions, is probably prone to throwing some against a defensive, a secondary in the Miami Hurricanes that has a lot of guys on this team, and some that might also be coming back. We want to get into that as well. There's some guys that this Miami Hurricanes team has also been riding injuries throughout the course of the season. Obviously, CJ Daniels was injured for part of the season, one of the Miami's best receivers behind maybe at Malachi Toney at this point. And then in the secondary, they've also faced some injuries at times, but this defense also just looked really good. And if they're fully healthy, I think one of the best units in all of college football. So I definitely think that Miami is the lean here, but I wouldn't go that drastic, especially given the fact that the odds makers seem to think that Texas A&M is the better team.
I almost feel like some people could take it as like a sign of disrespect to say 10 to 14 points is potentially a range here that's within a ballpark of reason. And then, they think probably I'm like going back and forth because I'm saying it's going to be a close game, but you can win by, 10 to 14 points and still be a close competitive game. I think that's actually probably where it ends up. I would say my final score predictions somewhere around like 31-24 to 31-20. Um, if they take care of the ball, I just think Miami's a better team. I think they've shown us more at their peak. Now they certainly have lower lows, but I question how tough or how much Texas A&M has been challenged this year. And I think that can just lead us into exactly maybe why we're downing Texas A&M before we kind of get into how they could win this game. Texas A&M, I believe, before the Texas game, had played more teams that had fired their head coach than were 500. And that makes me believe that Notre Dame win was doing a lot more heavy lifting than maybe we thought, at least prior to the Longhorns game. And being 11-0 in the SEC is no slouch. I'm not here to make excuses or qualify it. That's a great start to the year. And then obviously you go 11-1, extremely respectable. They just miss out on the SEC championship game. It is what it is. But when I do take a look at that schedule, I got to notice that they're not playing some of those other teams that really, really matter. And it just so happens that LSU and Florida, their years kind of fell apart. And that's just what it was. I think this is a team that hasn't been completely challenged. And if Tyler Buchner had held that snap, I know we're talking a lot of ifs, but if he did hold that snap on an extra point, we could be talking about something a little different here, or a completely different matchup. So I do think, just as a whole, Texas A&M just doesn't have that ceiling. So I'll opt for Miami. Although I do know that Miami's floor is lower or just as low as anybody in the playoffs.
I'm going to make a point on the scheduling too, but I think that last point about the Miami's floor being so low is definitely a point that's well heard. I think that Carson Beck at his lowest, we know that he can throw up to as many picks as he wants to, which is unfortunate, but it's just the reality of the situation. Carson Beck does is known for some of his interceptions, especially at the end of his tenure at Georgia that last season, and then into his bad games in Miami. So I think that if that we do see that Carson Beck where he is throwing interceptions and is just not playing well. The floor for Miami is, as like you mentioned, as low as almost any team. Maybe not the group of five teams, but still very low relative to all the teams that are going to be competitive in the college football playoff this year. But I want to get back to the schedule for a second here. I think that the schedule for Texas A&M, it's like when you really start to looking at it in depth, not only the point that you made about the fired head coaches stat, but then also some of the wins that they've had are also like not, it's nitpicky, right? But 16-10 versus Auburn, and at that point they had their season was still, they had everything to play for, and it was still a relatively it wasn't the Auburn team that we know at the end of the season, but still 16-10, it was a very unconvincing win. And then you look at the Arkansas game that they followed up with 2 weeks later, they win 45-42 at Arkansas. That Arkansas team won one SEC game the whole season, although they were in more games than you'd really realize if you just look at their schedule. But still, and especially towards the end of the season, that South Carolina game was very concerning, especially from a perspective of Marcel Reed. He was just throwing the ball to the Gamecocks all over the place in the first half, obviously sharpened up in the second half. And then the Texas game, we didn't really see much from their offense at all, and the Texas defense was kind of just dominant. So I think that there are some holes in the resume, although you do have to start getting nitpicky with it. 11-0 in the SEC until that last game is still 11-0 and then 11-1. So I think that the Texas A&M team is good, but both of these teams have maybe not comparable floors, because Miami has shown that their floor can be lower, especially in the ACC. But Texas A&M can have a bad game as well.
Yeah, some of the Texas A&M's floor, or like that first half against South Carolina, is scary, but there should be something to be said about this team taking care of business, and they have done that for a good majority of this year. I think, how do they win? I certainly think that their offensive showing against Notre Dame was probably more convincing. They have had some late game heroics that I think I certainly would lean their way a late game if it is really close. If they have the ball in Marcel Reed's hands, I think that is seriously an advantage. And I also don't think that their offensive line is bad by any means. So if they can limit getting pushed around at the line of scrimmage, I think that that's a big deal. If they can get their one of their running backs back in this game, just as in the same vein that Miami needs to get Jacoby Thomas back in the secondary, that could be a big help. Both of these teams healthy. You're kind of comparing with that. They certainly got plenty of weapons on the outside on offense. I wouldn't put it past this team to be able to score some points here. I think that there's a real path for them to win. And if they win this turnover battle, I will say my prediction definitely hinges on the turnover battle either going Miami's way or it being equal. Both teams at 1, both teams at 2, both teams at 0. But if this game gets out of control and there's a funky quarter, something like that, I think that's got to be Texas A&M's edge.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. The edge in either scenario here, because Marcel Reed again he's maybe not known for his interceptions as much as Carson Beck is, but he still threw 10 on the season, and it hasn't been like as maybe as protective as with the ball as you'd want from your starting quarterback. But at the same time, like they have so many weapons on the outside. Ashton Bethel Rome in the South Carolina game was huge for them. I think he had like 150 plus yards in one of his best games in his career. And then obviously Mario Craver and Casey Concepcion. They're two guys that are number one guys on almost any team in college football. They both ended with over 800 yards on the season, and both of them were just absolute weapons on the outside. They really have two number ones, and they can, like we saw in the Notre Dame game where they put up 44 points. They can go out and have a really good performance. I think that this Miami defense is maybe a different animal, but I will say that their pathway to winning is probably a high scoring game where they win the turnover battle.
Texas's defense was good this year, but they had some games, they had some matchups where they did not look like the defense that was there for the first 6 weeks of the year. So I'll just come out and say it right now. I think Corey Heatherman's unit, I think it's probably going to be the best defense that Texas A&M has played all season long. Now, there's been some good SEC teams, so I think that that's an interesting challenge. Do you have a final score prediction? I'm going to go 31-20, like I mentioned earlier.
I'll go 28-21.